About 20 years ago, I had some pretty sudden life changes and ended up renting a house in a small suburban neighborhood. It was nice. It was a major change for me, and I would say that it was peaceful, a fresh start. The house was charming, not too big, had a comfortable little yard, and I knew the person that was renting it out, so it wasn't too expensive. As comfortable as it was, I will say that some of the neighbors were a bit out there. The majority of them were kind people, but some of them were nosy. One neighbor in particular, Mr. Weller, was a very confusing individual. He lived in the house directly across from mine, and the day I moved in, I saw him standing outside on his front porch, just sipping on a glass of tea and watching me. He waved, he seemed friendly, but we didn't talk, so the only knowledge I had of him was that he lived there and was willing to wave at a neighbor that was outside. I didn't see him for a couple days after that, but about a week or so later, when I had gotten home from work, I felt eyes stabbing me when I was walking up to my house. I turned around to see who was staring at me, and I noticed Mr. Weller standing at his front window and just staring. He wasn't trying to hide the fact that he was staring. He was clearly watching me with an unreadable expression. I waved, thinking maybe he was just lost in thought and didn't realize he was staring, but he didn't wave back or blink even. He just held that same deadpan stare. I felt a bit unnerved about the whole thing. I quickly made my way inside, but the eerie feelings didn't stop there. When I'd come home from work or a jog, he would be there, staring at me. When I would step out to get the mail, he would be there at his window. If he was outside doing something like mowing the lawn and I went outside, he would stop doing whatever he was doing, go back inside, and stare at the window until I went back inside. Then it got worse. Sometimes, whenever I would go inside from doing whatever I would need to do, my landline would ring, but when I'd answer it, the person would just hang up. No breathing, no voice, just me saying, "Hello?" and then a click as they hung the call up. I couldn't prove who it was. The caller ID would show blocked, but I had this weird feeling that it was Mr. Weller. I had no idea what I had done wrong, or if I had done something that made him hate me, but clearly this man had something against me. I called up the person that owned the house. They were friends of my mother's, so I had their number, and I asked her if she'd ever had any troubles with Mr. Weller. She told me that she hadn't personally, but I was only the second person to rent the house, but the other tenant hadn't mentioned any issues. So by this point, I knew it was just me. After a while, it started to get to me. The incessant staring, the silent calls, it actually made me feel paranoid. I would actively avoid going outside so that I didn't have to see him standing there and staring at me. I stopped going for my jogs, and when I got home from work, I would just go straight to the house without turning around. I would get the mail every few days to avoid having to walk to the end of the street. It hit a point where I would wake up thinking that he was staring in my windows, literally just paranoid. Then I hit my limit. I went outside to get my mail one day, and sure enough, he was there at the window, staring daggers at me. My paranoid shifted to rage, and I started walking toward Mr. Weller's house. I hate confrontation, but I was done with all of this. As I was walking to the house, I watched Mr. Weller pull the curtains closed and retreat into the house, but I wasn't going to just let it go. I stepped on his porch and I banged on the door, probably harder than I should have. After a few seconds of waiting for him to answer the door, part of me was actually more angry at the possibility of him being a coward and not answering. Then the door unlocks and opens, and the person that answered was not Mr. Weller. A frail older woman opened the door and looked at me with a big smile and asked how she could help me. I was a bit confused. I'd never seen this woman. I mentioned that I was looking to speak with Mr. Weller, and she looked at me a bit like she was upset at my request. She then hits me with, "Oh, I'm sorry, dear. My brother Kennedy passed away a few months ago. I've been living here for a few months now." I had no idea what to say, but after a few moments she smiled again and said, "Were you close?" I shyly just kind of shook my head and mentioned that I was a neighbor and that I was sorry for her loss. She thanked me and I awkwardly made my exit out of the conversation, feeling like a total idiot. I was walking back to my house, just thinking about how creepy it was that he was dead and had been for a few months. I got chills thinking about how I would see him staring at me from the window, even though he was gone. Then I stopped and it hit me that this was all a load of BS, and that I had literally seen him mowing the lawn the day before. I turned and looked back at their house, and sure enough, he was there at the window staring at me. I actually laughed as I went inside. This jerk was such a coward and was so unwilling to face me after being a creep for so long that he had whoever that woman was, his sister or wife or whatever, lie and tell me he was dead. After that, the staring and calls actually stopped. He never bothered me again, and I would see him outside doing whatever he would do, and I would wave at him anytime we made eye contact, mostly to taunt him, and he would just scowl and turn away. In the end, I don't know what the hell Mr. Weller's problem was. I don't know what I did to make him dislike me, and I do not know why he was such a creep, but I was thankful it all stopped. I only lived in that house for another year, and the whole time, I never spoke to him or that woman, and I never had any other problem. I used to live in a pretty rundown apartment complex. I was pretty young, in my mid-20s, but it was still a place of my own. It was a studio, so not much room, which was fine because I didn't have any furniture when I first moved in. I eventually got a futon, which became my couch and bed, and a pre-owned lazy boy style chair. I didn't need much though, so I was fine with it. And when I say run down, I meant it. Sometimes my bathroom light stopped working, and I got tired of telling the office, so I watched a video on YouTube to figure out how to fix it, and I did it myself. The doorknob was pretty loose, so I never relied on that lock, and thankfully there was a deadbolt. I just hoped the door frame held up. The neighborhood also wasn't the best, with plenty of robberies and car thefts, so what money I did save on the apartment, I put it into a reserved spot in the secured parking garage. All in all, it was just a place for me to sleep, eat, and play my Xbox. However, it wasn't all bad. I had a pretty chill neighbor at the time, Stacy. He was a very laid-back hippie-style guy. I remember when he introduced himself, he told me his real name, but then said he didn't like that name because it was too corporate. So he went by the name Stacy because he liked it. I saw no reason to question him, so I knew him as Stacy. He never wore pants. He was typically wearing shorts like cargo shorts, never jean shorts. If he wasn't wearing a tie-dye shirt, it was either some kind of poncho or just a jean jacket with no shirt underneath it. He had dreads that went past his shoulders and a beard probably equally as long. He had a pretty cool plant that he kept outside his door. I think he said it was some kind of tree, and he took extensive care of it. I often saw him watering it, replacing the pot, or even putting things like eggshells in it to help the soil, as he put it. He also liked to sit outside his apartment with a beer and just look out the entrance door. He often left his door open as he said he was trying to keep it cool in there, and he always had incense going. I just assumed he had troubles with his AC, as I always did. He also invited me over to smoke, but I always politely declined, as that was never really my thing, but I don't judge. We were also living in a state where it was legal. But like clockwork, I would come home from work late at night. He'd be out there with his can, we'd have a small conversation, and he'd invite me over. I'd decline. He'd say that was a bummer and wish me a good night. For the area and building, at least I had a pretty cool neighbor, I thought. However, as expected with an old place like it was, I started hearing a weird scratching sound. The first time, it was late at night, and it was after I got off work, so I figured I was just hearing things and let it go. When I heard it again, I thought maybe it was an appliance like the fridge or AC unit, so I made a mental note to check them the next day since I was off. However, during the day, it never seemed to happen, and it also didn't happen every night. So the next night, I was laying in my bed and heard the sound. I sprung up and started hunting for it. To my surprise, the sound wasn't coming from the unit, the fridge, or the hot water heater. So I tried to hone into the sound, and I traced it to part of the wall. My futon was against the left wall, with the chair at an angle facing the TV. The TV was in the corner on the opposite side, with my desk and computer against the wall opposite of my bed. The sound seemed like it was coming from the wall that my desk was against, but closer to where my TV was. This was also the same wall that I shared with Stacy, so the next day, I asked him if he was hearing the sound too. He said he didn't, but would keep his ears open and let me know. Whatever it was, I felt I needed to let the office people know so they could look into it too. Since it was an old building, I was worried if maybe there were mice that managed to get in and were living in the wall. If that's the case, then they needed to look into it quickly and before it got worse. But as expected, they didn't move quickly at all. I continued to hear the sound for probably a week, and it was driving me insane. You could hear the little scritch and scrapes, and I thought it was going to go crazy. I was already having an unrestful night due to other influences, so this was just adding to it, and I decided to figure it out myself. I didn't know what I was going to do, but in case it was a mouse, I grabbed a big pot to use as a trap and some trail mix I had as bait. I felt along the wall again and started moving my TV and the little entertainment center it sat on so I could get behind it. That's when I saw it. There was a small pile of wall, like plaster and dust, and a hole in the wall. One of my cables was being pulled into it as well. My first thought was, hell no. I wasn't going to let some rodent chew through the cable, especially if it was the one to my Xbox. So I slowly knelt down, put the pot into place, and quickly yanked the cable out of the hole. However, no mouse came running out, nor was there a sound like it was scurrying through the hole, but yet the scratching sound continued. It may have been stupid, but I angled my phone to shine the flashlight into the hole and leaned down into it. What I wasn't expecting to see was someone's hand with their fingers wiggling around. I barely had time to process this when I saw an extremely bloodshot eye looking through the hole, making me jump back. I was kind of on alert, thinking it had to be Stacy, right? This was his wall too, but why would he be doing this? I shouted his name and asked him what the hell he was doing, but I don't think I really got an answer. From what I could hear, he started laughing, a laugh I had never heard from him before. Then he started spouting nonsense. I think I heard things like, "It's there. I can see it. I made it. Where'd it go? Where'd it go? I can't get it. Get it? Yes. It won't stop. I can make it stop. I found it. Where'd it go?" It was just the same thing over and over, and I had never seen him like this. So I went out and knocked on his door, but as I heard him yelling, he never answered the door. So I tried opening it myself, and it was unlocked. I opened the door but didn't go in after seeing what I did. Stacy was still on the floor, digging at the wall with a fork and one of those small garden shovels, repeating basically what I had been hearing. I asked him what the hell he was doing, and he stopped, stood up, and unlike his normal look, he was terrifying. His hair was a mess, he was in just his boxers, and his eyes were red, but also looked kind of hazy. I'm not quite sure how to explain it, but if he was laying down, I would have thought he was dead. My anger and confusion turned to fear and concern when he stood up and was just staring at me like he didn't understand how I got there. I told him to sit down and motioned to his couch, and he slowly walked over to the couch and started talking about hearing them too, and how he was going to find it for me because I was his buddy and his only buddy. Then, as if on cue, he looked at me, said goodnight with a smile, and fell over and started seizing. I knew how to handle people seizing since my mother had them, so I immediately ran to him, laid him down safely, and called 911. They came and got him to the hospital, and after explaining everything, one of them said it may have been drug-related. I didn't want to get him in trouble, but I also didn't want him to die, so I mentioned the pot, but the cop laughed and said he knew he used, but that's not what this was. They left, and I didn't see Stacy for a few days, so I just shut his door and watered his plant for him. I told the office about the hole, but that I didn't know what happened, and as expected, they said they would schedule to have it fixed, so I just got a small board and put over the hole in the meantime. When Stacy did come back, he came over and apologized to me for what happened. He explained that he ran out of his normal drug of choice and was given something else to try, and obviously had some pretty bad trips. He said he didn't feel like he was himself, like he wasn't controlling his body. I don't remember what he said it was though. It was a terrifying experience for both of us, and he promised he wasn't ever going to use it again, and thanked me for watering his plant. He then brought over some killer tamales he made the next night. I wouldn't want to experience that trip again, but I also wouldn't mind having him as a neighbor again if that were to ever happen. I got my first place shortly after graduating high school in 2009. I already had a stable job that I was working at while in school because they were very flexible when it came to us students and the pay was decent. After school was out, I started working there full time as I wasn't planning on going to college, at least not immediately after high school, so I wanted to make more money and save up to get my own apartment. I applied to a few places and finally landed on this cute little house that was actually split into two sides, making it a duplex, I suppose. One side was a 2-bedroom and the other was a 1-bedroom. My side would be the 1-bedroom. My dad came with me when I did the walkthrough to make sure everything was up to snuff for him, and then we met with the landlord, who would also be my neighbor, as he happened to be living on the other side of the house. I thought he was around the same age as my parents. He had a buzz cut style hair, some facial hair like it had just been growing out, and a pretty average build, but he was short. I was barely over 5 foot, and we were about the same height. It was kind of funny how he had to look up at my dad. We waited out front when we saw him walk out the other side. He introduced himself as Kelly, and said that he was given the house by his parents, but knew he wasn't going to need a house that size, and decided that he could turn a profit on it by splitting it. After looking around and discussing rent and responsibilities, I went ahead and accepted it. The rent was decent as he included the price of the utilities, so all I had to pay for was internet or cable if I chose to do so. I started moving in sometime that same week. My parents helped me as well as one of my best friends, and even Kelly came over at one point. Once I got everything moved in, my friend stayed over to help me move around boxes, and I ordered dinner. When the doorbell rang, I went to get it and was surprised when Kelly was holding my pizza. He said he saw the guy approach and thought he would be kind and pay for it as a celebratory meal. He also said that if I ever needed anything, that I could call him or just knock on his door, especially if anything needed repairs. I thanked him and brought the pizza in, not thinking anything else of it. However, I would soon learn that he wasn't just some generous landlord and helpful neighbor. He seemed to be outside at the same time I was. When I was leaving for work, he would walk out and say good morning, or he would actually be sitting out front in a chair, waving as I drove away. He was also outside when I came home, or would knock on the door if he missed me coming home. It was fine for a while, but then it started getting tiring. After I got home, before I would even take my shoes off, I would stand by the door expecting him to be there shortly. I was right. I tried dropping a subtle hint saying I would be sure to reach out if I needed anything, so that way he didn't have to waste his time coming over all the time. He seemed to get the hint as I stopped seeing him as much in the morning or when I came home. I ended up having a few friends over one night once I got unpacked and settled in, like a housewarming party. Now, none of my friends nor I drank. We preferred eating greasy pizza, drinking weird flavored sodas, and playing video games. So a few hours in, we're all having a good time, playing Monopoly, when I heard a knock at my door. It was Kelly again. This time, he looked annoyed, asking what was going on. I told him I had a few friends over for a housewarming party, and he said something about us being too loud. I apologized, saying I would keep it down, but before I could do anything else, Kelly was looking over my shoulder and shouting something about the game, and pretty much let himself in. He sat down, helped himself to one of my root beers, and cracked jokes with a few of my friends. The thing is, he started acting like he was drunk. My friends were cracking up, and I was too, but maybe a bit more embarrassed than anything. After some time, I showed him to the door and he left, saying he loved us all. Shortly after, my friends dispersed as well. The next day, Kelly came over and apologized for how he acted. He said that's why he doesn't normally drink. I wasn't about to tell him it was root beer, so I just accepted the apology and moved on. It progressively got worse when he would be outside, seemingly drunk, and would make comments about me being gorgeous and making someone happy one day. He even asked for a hug one time when my friend was coming over. She teased me later that he probably liked me, which meant I could get away with more. My first thought was gross, as he looked older, and second, I am not going to take advantage of that. Then he would apologize the next day, saying he was embarrassed and didn't mean what he had said. I just tried to ignore it and move on. But I guess I didn't put my foot down firmly enough, as he thought it would be okay to even let himself in at times. I had called him one time because the toilet seemed to be constantly running and asked if he could take a look at it. I was getting ready to leave when he knocked on the door, saying he was there to look at the toilet. I had to be somewhere but told him it was fine to fix it and that I would be back shortly. I was gone for a few hours, and when I came back, I found him still in my place. I asked him if it was something bad since it had taken so long, and he pretty much explained yes. He said that he was going to have to get a part so I couldn't use it, but if I needed to, I could use his bathroom. I thought it was kind of weird, but agreed, and he left for the night. The next day, I was going to my parents to have dinner and do some laundry. I didn't have my own machines yet. While there, I told my parents about what happened, and my dad suggested something that was easy to fix. He followed me back to my place, checked the toilet himself, and was able to fix the problem that night. He just chalked it up to him probably not knowing what to do, and said I could call him anytime since he always did the repairs on their home. I was much more comfortable with that anyways. Kelly seemed to be upset when I told him that it had been fixed the next day though. But, he didn't have to fix it or pay for anything, so I didn't understand why. However, he seemed to take this as a chance to do check-ins whenever he wanted. Like when I was taking a shower and I heard what sounded like a door slamming. I wrapped a towel around me and looked down the hallway to the living room, not seeing anything. I thought maybe I was just hearing things too, and made my way to my bedroom to get dressed. I had my pants on and a bra, but remembered I had left my lotion in the living room that I had just bought sitting by my purse, so I went to grab it. That's when I saw someone standing in the kitchen, and, of course, it was Kelly. I screamed at him, telling him to leave, and he didn't even jump or look scared. He continued to stare at me, smiling, saying he was just doing rounds to make sure everything worked properly. As I grabbed a pillow or my jacket hanging up, trying to cover myself, I continued screaming at him to get the hell out until he finally dropped his hands and just walked out angrily. I locked the door, went back to finish getting dressed, and then called him, yelling at him. I told him he can't just come in at any time he wanted to like that, and how creepy it was, and the fact that he didn't even apologize for it. He said he had no reason to apologize as it was his place and he could go in anytime he wanted to, but he didn't mean to startle me. I didn't know if he just tried taking advantage of me since I was younger, but I had enough. I told my parents about it and my dad suggested we change the lock. The deadbolt was the same, but we installed a new doorknob. He threatened to charge me more rent since I wasn't allowed to do that. I told my friends, and I had one of my guy friends stay with me one weekend, hoping to deter him when, again, he threatened to raise my rent since I had someone living there that wasn't on the lease. Eventually, my parents convinced me to just leave the place, screw the deposit and get out as he seemed unsafe, which I did. It became a storage place for the most part, for my big items, but otherwise, I moved everything important either back in with my parents or my friend's place. He continued to text me for some time, but I eventually had to change my phone number as he wouldn't let up. There wasn't anything in writing though, which I suppose should have been a red flag from the start, but because of this, he didn't really have any option to take me to court. I just wanted out of that place for good. Thankfully, I never had any creepy neighbors or landlords like that afterwards, and I hope to maintain that streak. So that, my friends, was a collection of creepy neighbor stories. Those were some interesting ones. It's had your standard one with Kelly, unfortunately, but then you had Mr. Weller. I don't know what I would do in that situation. That's kind of weird. Thankfully, we haven't had any too insane neighbors. Our current neighbor is she usually keeps to herself, so that's nice. What about you guys? Have you ever had any weird experiences with a neighbor before? Let me know. And if you did enjoy this video, please do give it a like below. And if you'd like to hear more content like this, consider subscribing. And lastly, don't forget to leave that comment. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know what kind of stories you like to listen to or just how you've been. I'd love to hear from you. And with that being said, friends, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week. And until next time, take care.